18-year-old Raul Tinajero, or Smokey, and 20-year-old Santiago Pineda were neighbors for years, and they knew each other pretty well. Santiago claimed the East Side Wilmas, a gang based out of Wilmington, specifically the ghost town Locos clique. On March 6, 2002, Santiago and Raul spent the day drinking, and by nighttime, one of Santiago's friends started driving them around. While stopped at an intersection, the group noticed a white Infiniti nearby. Behind the wheel was a man named Rafael Sanchez. Rafael was a mechanic who worked 2 jobs, with dreams of one day opening his own shop. His sister described him as the kind of guy who'd pull over to help a stranger with car trouble, or offer a ride to someone who was stranded. He lived with his mother after his wife and daughter moved to Minnesota. Neither Santiago nor Raul had ever met Rafael before, but Santiago struck up a conversation with him and gave him a bottle of tequila through the car window. Rafael, who seemed pretty drunk already, took a swig and passed it back. Raul, Santiago, and Santiago's friend then headed to Santiago's home in Wilmington on Blinn Street, and Rafael followed them in his Infiniti. They hung out in front of the house for a while before they decided to drive to Long Beach to pick up some girls. This time, they all left in Rafael's Infiniti, with him behind the wheel. Around 11 p.m., the group stopped by the home of Eduardo Quevedo, one of Rafael's closest friends. Eduardo said that Rafael looked drunk and was with 2 other guys, one of whom he identified as Santiago. Concerned for his friend, Eduardo offered to give him a ride home, but Rafael refused and left with Santiago and Raul. Not long after, they picked up Santiago's cousin. During the car ride, Rafael pulled into an alley, so he, Santiago, and Santiago's cousin could pee. As soon as Rafael got out of the car, Santiago and his cousin ran back to the Infiniti and drove away with Raul, leaving Rafael stranded. They drove the stolen Infiniti back to Wilmington and parked it a block from Santiago's house. Then, they headed back to the house like nothing happened. About 30 minutes after the first visit, Rafael showed up at Eduardo's place again, but this time he was alone and on foot. He told Eduardo that the men he was with beat him up and stole his car. He looked upset, but still didn't want to go home. Instead, he asked Eduardo to drop him off at the auto repair shop where he worked. Eduardo took him there and proceeded to park nearby so he could keep an eye on him. From his car, he saw Rafael leave in a Honda, and he then followed him in his own car. But at some point, Eduardo lost sight of him. Later that night, Rafael returned to Santiago's home, now in the Honda. He was angry and demanded his car back. Santiago claimed it was in Long Beach and offered to help him find it. Rafael, Santiago, and Raul then headed out again, this time in the Honda with Rafael driving. Santiago was sitting in the front passenger seat, and Raul was sitting in the back seat. Around 1:30 a.m., Rafael stopped by at his sister's house. He went inside and asked for something to eat. She said that he seemed furious. He told her that his car was stolen, and he knew exactly who did it, someone living on Blinn Street in Wilmington. He stayed about 10 to 15 minutes, then told her he had to drop off a couple people first before confronting the thieves at their place. While Rafael was inside, Santiago turned to Raul and calmly told him that he was going to strangle Rafael and steal the Honda too. He even asked Raul to help. Raul claimed he said no, and that he wanted no part of it. They then switched seats. Santiago climbed into the back, and Raul moved up front. When he came back, Rafael got back in the driver's seat and continued driving them around, still looking for his missing Infiniti. The 2 men played along, pretending to help look for the car. Eventually, Rafael pulled into an alley in Long Beach at Palmer Court. That's when Santiago reached around the driver's headrest and wrapped his arm around Rafael's neck, choking him. Rafael didn't fight back. Once it seemed like he lost consciousness, Santiago opened the driver's door and dragged Rafael out of the car, dumping him onto the ground. Santiago then climbed into the driver's seat and began driving forward and backward, running over Rafael's body several times. Meanwhile, Virginia Ramos and David Rodriguez were inside their home on Palmer Court. Early that morning, Virginia got up to grab some milk for her daughter. About 15 to 30 minutes later, the couple's dog started barking. When David looked outside, he saw a man crawling in the alley, moaning. At first, he thought maybe the guy was drunk or had been jumped. He ran back inside to call for an ambulance, and then went back outside. After running over Rafael's body, Santiago and Raul drove the Honda back to Wilmington and ditched it. But Santiago wasn't done. He told Raul he wanted to, quote, "go check it out." So they drove back to Palmer Court in the stolen Infiniti. When they got there, Santiago started speeding down the alley. David, who was still outside, went back inside because he did not want to see the man in the alley get hit. Then he and Virginia heard the sound of two loud thumps. It was Santiago running over Rafael again. The couple then watched as the white car passed by their home. Virginia called 911 again and told them that someone had run over the injured man they called in about earlier. At around 1:50 a.m., the fire department arrived. They saw a white Infiniti blocking the path to the alley, with two Hispanic men inside. They noticed that the front of the car was damaged and the windshield was broken. The fire captain proceeded to provide a description of the Infiniti to dispatch. Santiago then moved the car to let the fire truck pass, then parked a short distance away. Santiago and Raul then got out and walked back to the alley, watching as the fire department tried to help Rafael. Then they got back in the Infiniti and drove off, heading back toward Wilmington. First responders found Rafael lying on the ground in critical condition. He wasn't breathing and had no pulse. They tried everything, but they couldn't save him. He was pronounced dead at the scene. Not long after, a Long Beach police officer spotted a white Infiniti just half a block away, which matched the description that was given to them. Its headlights were off, even though it was still dark outside. He tailed the car for a bit and then pulled it over. Inside the car were Santiago and Raul. The officer smelled alcohol on Santiago immediately. Minutes later, the fire department personnel who were at Palm Court confirmed that the car was the same one they saw in the alley, and both men were arrested on the spot. After the arrests, tests confirmed that Santiago was under the influence of a central nervous system stimulant, which he later said was meth. He also had marijuana and alcohol in his system. An accident investigator with the Long Beach Police Department responded to the scene on Palmer Court in the early hours of March 7th. The investigator noted that the damage to the front of the Infiniti and the broken windshield looked old. But once they got underneath the car, they noticed fresh damage to the oil pan and scrape marks running along the undercarriage. He confirmed that this kind of damage happens when a car has something lodged against it and drags it along the pavement. He concluded that Rafael was lying flat on the pavement when he was run over, and estimated that the car was moving at around 30 to 35 miles per hour at the moment of impact. Investigators found traces of red fluid underneath the Infiniti, which tested positive for human blood, and DNA analysis confirmed that the blood belonged to Rafael. The official cause of death was multiple traumatic injuries that led to blood loss and loss of vital functions. Rafael's injuries included general abrasions going in different directions to the right side of his body, abrasions on his face, 9 fractured ribs, a fractured right clavicle, bilateral fractures to the front of his pelvis, and lacerations to his lungs, liver, pancreas, bladder, and prostate. Rafael also had a fractured hyoid bone in his neck and hemorrhages in the sclera of his eyes, injuries consistent with strangulation. Toxicology results showed no drugs in his system, but his blood alcohol level was high, which was consistent with reports that he'd been drinking that night. On March 11, 2002, just days after Rafael's death, Santiago was charged with vehicular manslaughter, DUI causing injury, and leaving the scene of an accident. He pleaded not guilty. At first, Raul tried to cover for Santiago. When detectives first questioned him, he claimed Santiago never ran anyone over. But about a week later, after he got released, police showed up at his house to question him one more time. That time, Raul broke down and confessed everything. At the preliminary hearing, Raul testified against Santiago, and after that hearing, prosecutors upgraded the charges to murder. Raul was going to be the prosecution's star witness at trial. But when the trial started, Santiago's attorney got sick, forcing the court to declare a mistrial. A new trial was scheduled, but by then Raul was behind bars on forgery and driving a vehicle without permission charges. Both men ended up housed at Men's Central Jail in Los Angeles, though in different sections. There were strict instructions to keep Santiago away from Raul. In the Men's Central Jail, it wasn't hard for inmates to move around to different areas of the jail if they really wanted to. The system relied heavily on trust. If an inmate in Gen Pop had a court pass, which could be borrowed or even stolen, he could leave his unit without being cuffed or escorted. If an inmate showed up at the jail's reception center with a court pass, but it turned out he wasn't actually scheduled for court, he'd just be told to head back to his unit. And if an inmate got to another part of the jail, staff usually just asked their name and whether their cell was at that unit. Most of the time, jail issued wristbands and passes weren't even checked. In December 2003, Santiago went up to another inmate, Luis Montalban, who'd been assigned to work as a trustee in West Hollywood, a job that came with a lot of freedom. Santiago asked for his wristband. When Luis refused, Santiago threatened him and told him that if he didn't give him the wristband, he would be regulated. Regulate is a term used in jail to describe a beating. Fearing for his safety, Luis handed it over. Santiago then left the jail in Luis's place, but his plan was unsuccessful. He was sent back to the jail in a bus, and when they searched him, they found both the stolen wristband and also a card that would allow him to be taken to West Hollywood as a trustee. Then in April 2004, a woman named Irma Lemus, who was working as a corporate receptionist, started receiving strange letters and phone calls from someone who called himself Santi and Chingon. One letter was signed Santiago Pineda Hernandez Chingon and included the line from the Big Badass ES Wilmus, referencing the East Side Wilmus Street gang. During their chats, Irma gave him a fake name, Irma Gardia. At a later date, that fake name and her real address and phone number were found in a notebook seized from Santiago. In their exchanges, Santiago admitted he was locked up on a 187 for running someone over. The 187 is a reference to California's Penal Code section for murder. He also brought up someone named Raul, a man he said was testifying against him. He called Raul a clown and said he needed to get a hold of him. He even asked Irma to use her computer to try and find out whether Raul was also in jail, but she said no. Santiago later told her not to worry, and that he already had a homie who got him the info. He also bragged that he managed to get a hold of another inmate's wristband to try to escape the jail, referring to the wristband he took from Luis. Raul was being held in cell D13, which he shared with a few other people. It was one of those cells that couldn't easily be seen from the officer's station. On the morning of April 20th, 2004, Santiago managed to get his hands on another inmate's court pass and used it to leave his cell. Jail records show he scanned into the inmate reception center at 5:02 a.m. Gregory Palikal, one of the inmates Raul shared his cell with, had just returned from a parole hearing when he ran into Santiago in the waiting room of their pod. Santiago casually asked him what cell he was in. When Gregory said D13, Santiago followed up with a question. "Is Smokey from West Side in there?" Gregory said he thought so. Eventually, Santiago's wristband was scanned, but obviously it didn't match the pass he had. He apologized, acted like it was an honest mistake, and walked away. Before heading back to the cells, Gregory noticed Santiago pick up a homemade cross on a string. He tore the cross off and put the string in his pocket. When it came time to return to the cells, Santiago slipped into cell D13 behind Gregory. Inside were several other inmates, including Anthony Sloan, who recognized Santiago right away and asked what he was doing there. Santiago basically told him that Raul was involved in the same case as him and was going to testify against him. Santiago casually sat on the toilet bowl, but after a few minutes he stood up, climbed onto the top bunk where Raul was sleeping, and flipped him over. Raul opened his eyes, realized what was happening, and tried to scream for help, but it was too late. Santiago had already wrapped his arm around his neck and put him in a chokehold. Santiago ended up yanking Raul down from the top bunk as he tried to get free, but it was no use. Santiago kept choking him for 10, maybe 15 minutes. At one point, Santiago looked around and told the other inmates in the cell to turn away. Raul eventually stopped moving. Once Raul went limp, Santiago dragged his unconscious body to the toilet, shoved his face into the toilet bowl, and used his knee to press down on the back of his neck. Then he flushed and held him in the water for several minutes trying to drown him. Afterward, Santiago checked for a pulse, and there wasn't one. After that, just to make sure Raul was truly dead, Santiago dragged him onto the floor and started stomping on him repeatedly and watching for any kind of reaction. One of Raul's cellmates, Matthew Good, later said Santiago wasn't just stomping, he was jumping on Raul's chest. Anthony said he heard loud popping or snapping noise as Santiago stomped on Raul. According to Gregory, after killing Raul, Santiago didn't seem rushed or panicked. He calmly dressed his body, placed him on a mat, tied a string around his neck, ripped off his jail-issued wristband, and flushed it down the toilet. He then covered the body with a sheet and shoved it under the bunk, then cleaned up the cell. Then he started making phone calls using a phone in the cell. He was overheard saying, "Tell them it's a touchdown." He then sat back and flipped through magazines, and even passed a note down the row asking for cigarettes and a lighter. Then he started talking to the rest of the guys in the cell, casually explaining that Raul had testified against him before, and because the first trial ended in a mistrial, he now had a better chance because he wouldn't be around to take the stand again. Then, Santiago pulled out a notebook and started writing down everyone's names and booking numbers. He told them, "You know what time it is." Anthony interpreted that to mean that they would probably be next if they said anything. Later that day, jail staff came by for a routine clothing exchange. Santiago was still there in the cell, but no one said anything. Eventually, they started transferring inmates to another location. When the door to cell D13 opened, Santiago walked out casually with another inmate. Still, Anthony didn't say a word to the deputies over the fear of being labeled a snitch. Instead, he got to a phone and called his mother and his lawyer and told them what happened. His attorney, Andrew Stein, later testified that Anthony called him around 3:30 p.m., hysterical and on the verge of tears. Anthony told him a man had come into the cell, told everyone to look away, and then murdered one of his cellmates right there in front of him. Not long after, when another inmate returned from court and the door opened again, Anthony and the others finally stepped out and told a deputy there was a man down inside their cell. At about 4:20 p.m., deputies entered cell D13 and found Raul's lifeless body hidden under a bunk. An investigator with the county coroner's office arrived at cell D13 and estimated that Raul had died around noon. His wristband was missing, and there were clear signs of trauma, bruising around his neck, blood on his mouth, chest, legs, and even his clothes. There was blood on his boxers but not on his pants, which led investigators to believe Raul had been redressed after the murder. Blood was coming from his mouth, and dried blood was found on various parts of his body. They also found a distinct pattern on his neck that matched the soles of the standard-issue jail shoes. He also had tiny red dots in his eyes, along with a fractured cricoid cartilage under his voice box, which all pointed to a violent strangulation. According to the medical examiner, Raul's cause of death was asphyxia due to strangulation by ligature, although manual strangulation or an arm hold could not be excluded as the cause of death. On the night of the murder, a sheriff's deputy visited Santiago, since he was already flagged in the system as someone who needed to be kept away from Raul. The deputy took his clothes and noticed what looked like blood on one of the pant legs. DNA tests confirmed that the blood on Santiago's pants belonged to Raul. The ligature found around Raul's neck also had his DNA on it, and testing showed that Santiago could have been one of the contributors as well. Inside Santiago's clothes, deputies found a small notebook. Scrawled across its pages were gang references like El Chingon and E.S. Wilmus, along with the names and booking numbers of the 4 other guys who had been in cell D13 that day. Inside the notebook were also the letters RT and a number almost identical to Raul's jail booking number, which was just 1 digit off. When they searched Santiago's cell, they found transcripts from Raul's earlier testimony and court documents and police reports tied to the Rafael Sanchez murder case. 2 days after the murder, during an interview with detectives, one of them noticed fresh scratches on Santiago's right hand. In May 2004, Santiago called Sheriff's Deputy Jesus Argueta over to his cell. The two had grown up in the same neighborhood, so they knew each other from the outside. Santiago leaned in and asked if Jesus had heard what happened. When he said no, Santiago said he was being accused of killing Raul. He explained that he and Raul committed a murder together, but now, quote, "This fucker, he's snitching on me, so we had to get rid of him." And with Raul out of the picture, Santiago said, "They're going to have to offer me a deal because they wouldn't have shit on me now." That same month, another deputy, Josue Torres, was escorting Santiago back from court when Santiago smiled and said, "Hey Torres, I did it. I killed the fool that snitched on me." According to Josue, Santiago told him that he'd gotten the green light from the shot caller who controlled Raul's floor. All he had to do was show the right paperwork, meaning proof that Raul cooperated with the cops. He even told him how he managed to move around the jail undetected. On November 5, 2004, while Santiago was being held in the high-security unit at Men's Central Jail, deputies caught him drinking Pruno, a homemade alcohol that inmates brew themselves. When they tried to confiscate it, Santiago, who was clearly drunk, snapped. He threatened one of the deputies, saying he was going to stab him when he least expected it. As deputies tried to get him out of the cell, he didn't go quietly. They had to use a taser, but it didn't work because of his baggy clothes. Eventually, they managed to cuff him and remove him, but not without a fight. He was kicking, thrashing, and even spit on one of the officers. Then on July 30th, 2005, Santiago managed to escape from a locked shower area inside the jail's high-security area. Deputies left him unattended for a moment, but that's all he needed. Surveillance footage showed Santiago sprinting down the hallway, completely covered in soap, heading right back to his cell. By the time they returned, he was already inside like nothing happened, except for a giant red mark across his back. To figure out how he pulled it off, jail staff had another inmate attempt the same escape. When they lathered him in soap, he was able to slide through a narrow opening in the shower enclosure. In December 2006, the jury found Santiago Pineda guilty of the murders of Rafael Sanchez and Raul Tinajero. He was sentenced to death. Santiago has been on death row since 2007, and he is now 44 years old. Thank you for watching.